you describe this as not a tax increase.
That's correct.
Yet our sales tax rate is going to be higher than it ever has been since we instituted the sales tax in the 30s. What do you say to folks that if I'm paying more now than I was yesterday, that is a tax increase no matter what you did for me 3 years ago?
Well, 388,000 Kansans will go off the income tax rolls altogether.
Next year, though, that's for tax year 2016. They pay that sales tax starting July 1st.
And the net of it, John, is over a $300 million tax cut for total for all of Kansans. When you put this in total, and it's not unlike when Reagan did his major tax cut at the first of his administration. The next year, they raised taxes. They said, well, we've got a budget we've got to deal with, and they did. So you had that calibration that you worked with, and I think this is a very similar move to what happened at that point in time. We got a tax cut through the legislature the first time. It didn't look like what I'd proposed. Now you're ending up pretty close to the package of what I proposed at the outset. Tax on sales tax at that point in time when we started was 6.3. It'll be at 6.5. 0.2% change. Your income taxes will be from 6.45 to 4.7. 388,000 Kansans will be without an income tax. I think you have to look at the total package, and then I think you also have to add in, we had a Capers crisis. Capers was in the bankruptcy zone. So you put over $400 million additional in that. You put a lot of money in K-12 in the system, a huge increase in K-12 in the system. In that same period of time, you had a state lawsuit ordering equalization monies to go in. And then Medicaid is an entitlement program that you just have to pay for. You've got to look at the totality of the picture. When you look at that, it is a tax cut, and you've dealt with your major problems in state government.
Okay. Brian?
The legislature is expecting you to make about $50 million in cuts. Have you started identifying those cuts? Would K-12 be off the table? And then following that, there's some people who are predicting that the tax plan won't generate as much revenue as we're hoping. Do you anticipate that you'll have to make even more than that $50 million that the legislature is asking you?
I did the one line item veto today, as I mentioned, about 1.9 each of 16 and 17, as a start. And then Brian, we'll work hard in working on that 50 million additional. We'll look at everything we can on efficiencies, on privatization, on a series of areas that we'll go at, but we haven't started much of a serious look. This is a long legislative session to get through, and I wanted people to get rested up before you take on those next sets of issues.
Peter?
Yeah, Governor, this budget depends in large part on sweeping money out of the Department of Transportation and other funds. How are you going to sustain that in the future when you can't sweep any more money out of other funds? Are we going to need more tax increases in the future?
I don't think so, Peter. You may recall when I first came into office, we swept several $100 million from KDOT that year, had a huge budget hole. Then we're able to, 2 years later, not take any. Be nice if the national economy starts picking up some. Our position has improved. We've grown in our economic rankings as a state, but the national economy has been lethargic. But I don't think we're going to need to, and we've had that experience once already.
Okay, I'll go with Jason, and then I'll start coming back over to you on this side.
Okay, you mentioned when you started off about some people in the legislature didn't want to make this work. You'd be talking about conservatives, or like you, basically, ideologically, who are all about your policies, the tax cuts and all that, who voted against this. They're like you, they're conservatives. How does that strike you that they were the obstructionists?
Well, I wasn't referring to them because many of them ended up voting to do this. But
many barely passed by one vote in each house.
The minority party put forward no proposals to solve this issue. None. They just wanted to see it fail. And they didn't put any forward, and they just wanted to see it fail. That's their right. If they want to do that, that's okay. But They didn't put forward a single policy. You've got a number of conservatives voted for this, looking at the totality of the package. It's a tax cut, and it's movement from income taxes to consumption-based taxes. And I think at the end of the day, Kansans wanted to see these issues addressed, not just somebody sit back and say, I hope it fails.
We had conservatives breaking down the House floor, though, saying they hated to vote for this package, that they did, and they sucked it up and they did it. Others who didn't. So there's some disagreement inside the conservative movement.
The minority party put forward no solutions.
Well, Governor, with all due respect, they put forward a solution, let's say, to raise income taxes, which is what they were talking about. You consider it, they vote on it, and then at the next election, you guys beat them up for trying to help. So, you know, their argument is, you know, we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. In that kind of environment, you know, why wouldn't they just sit back and, you know, their argument was, you guys made the mess, you clean it up.
What I stated factually remains accurate. They offered no constructive proposals to address the issue.
Martin, did you have a question?
Yeah, you got approved, the Republicans in the legislature 4 years ago. Is now time to prune the legislature again for Republicans who won't smile along with you?
No.
You're happy with what
These guys did a good job in a very difficult situation. I mean, this is hard. What they did, you had to get the combination right to be able to pass it through. Had a lot of pressure, and they got it done. They got their work done. The furloughs didn't happen. They got it finished. I applaud that. And these are hard in legislative bodies. These are really hard to do. And they got it done. And I don't know that anybody's happy about it, but they got their work done. And Kansans should applaud them for getting that done. It took a long time, but they got it done.
Governor, people outside of Kansas looking in, they see you're the governor, you have Republicans have supermajorities in both the House and Senate, and at the end of the day, the rhetoric is kind of reversed from what it was. Some Republicans were arguing against extending the sales tax a couple of years ago, but this year you passed this large sales tax increase, and you leave people kind of scratching their heads as to why you couldn't cut your way to a balanced budget. Given conservative majorities everywhere in this state, why couldn't you do more of this through not transfers, but real cuts, cutting government down to size, which is what the rhetoric has been on the campaign trail?
Got your big three cost drivers in the system: education, Medicaid, and CAPERS. Education, you got a lawsuit, a court-ordered equalization. 14 to 15, the increase in education, K-12 was $195.5 million. Medicaid went up 87.6. It's an entitlement program. Pension system from 12 through 15, we put $445 million more into CAPERS. Thankfully. I mean, this is one, you guys have heard me say this before, but I just wish people would appreciate the importance of funding your pension system. And they've done it. And you've done that in a situation where you're reducing your dependence on the income tax at the same time. So this is a very difficult thing that they've done, but they've gotten it done. And your sales tax is at 6.5. It was at 6.3 when I started. Went down to 6.15. Is at 6.5. So and your income tax rates are substantially lower.
That's the difference between campaign rhetoric and actually having to govern, the reality of it.
Well, you got to get the work done, and they did. But they did it in theme and in line with continuing to reduce the tax burden on Kansans, which has taken place. They did it with being responsible with government, which is funding your core functions. Outside of those core functions, all other categories from 14 to 15 saw a decrease of funding, 15 million, and in 15 to 16 we'll see a 37 million decrease. But Kansans we're very proud of our schools, our K-12 system, and we continue to put increasing amounts of funding into it.
And if you would go ahead and just identify your name and affiliation as well.
Ann Meyer from KWCH in Wichita TV, CS affiliate. Obviously, you brought up pressure. I mean, in the last week going into the talks, there was a lot of folks who felt that there were threats about line item vetoes and what may happen. Tears were brought, many lawmakers were brought to tears. Can you just talk about that dynamic and how it may impact future relationships? Because clearly this legislative body has a lot of work to do next year. And there seemed to be a lot of tension amongst lawmakers this time.
Well, it's a tense environment because you do have to balance your budget, and the Constitution requires if you pass a budget, you've got to adequately fund it. And a number of folks were saying, well, let's try to find a different way out of it, because this is the budget I want, but the tax package I have to fund that is difficult. No, it was, there's just no question, it was a tense, difficult environment for a lot of people. It's a citizen legislature, and that is something we should never lose sight of, and we should never lose. So these are folks that freely give of their time, normally for 90 days, give up of their families and their work to come here and to serve. They don't have lots of staff. Normally they have one clerical person that answers the phone for several offices, and they're trying to figure their way through a complex budget. And they're looking at it going, well, I don't like any of these options. But the other option is, I'm looking at a furlough, or I'm looking at some sort of major line item vetoes, or veto the whole budget and back here in 3 days to fix it. I don't like any of these options. But the beauty of it is they did it, and they actually got things done. And a lot of it you're having to go off of, does this seem like the right way to go? Because there isn't a lot of staff analysis that can go into it to look through it. You're going off of opinion of a number of your colleagues that you trust because it's a citizen legislature. I thought they worked admirably in really difficult, extraordinary circumstances.
But you'll be with this group next year, so do you anticipate that this will carry over and that there will be some disagreements just based on what has happened in this last week?
There always is, but I think what you'll find with most legislators, these are really good-hearted people. They really just want to do what's best for the state of Kansas. They don't want to raise anybody's taxes. They want to cut everybody's taxes and provide everybody all the services they want. That's what they want to do. That's what we all want to do. But then you have the tension of how do you balance these two when you can't print money and you can't borrow limitlessly. Which is a really good thing that we can't print money and borrow limitlessly. So time will be a healer too, as people get away and get to relax some.
Okay. Jonathan Carter, KC2B5 in Kansas City. Governor, with the sales tax increase, you increased taxes on cigarettes as well. For the people along the state lines, particularly Johnson County, Wyandotte County, two of your bigger counties, do you have any concerns of people crossing state lines to do their business? Spending their money across state lines?
Yeah, those are, there's some anticipation of that. There's also a nice flow of Missourians moving into Kansas to live in Kansas. And we track that as well, with a lower income tax on Kansas side, with zero taxes on small business in Kansas, and not sure exact rates, but probably around 6% for some on the Missouri side. And that's an observable feature now in the Kansas City area, and it's certainly observable in a number of markets around the country where you have zero tax state sitting next to a income tax state that's above 4%. That's documented, and it's happening now, and it's happened in a lot of states.
Governor, I'm Shannon O'Brien with Fox 4 in Kansas City. And
welcome. Glad to have you guys here.
Well,
we don't get you guys over much.
Thanks. Well, we've been here quite a bit. We just haven't seen you, unfortunately.
You're not wandering the hallways talking to people.
You can talk about capers and all the money that's going into capers and these 388,000 low-income Kansans that are going to pay no income tax. and the sun is shining in Kansas. But how about the people who aren't going to benefit from the capers, who don't get a pension, who aren't part of these 388,000 low-income people who aren't going to see any taxes, who are going to see a net tax increase?
Well, you're going to see a bunch of them that saw their income taxes go down. Everybody had income taxes go down in this period of time, and the net effect is a reduction in taxes.
But wasn't the point of the income taxes going down to put more money in people's pockets? Now you're taking it out of their pockets with this sales tax increase.
The net is still,
everything.
the net is still a reduction.
We do have a
And-
spreadsheet that we'll share with you that has that data on it.
You know, when I started, we had 5 measurables we were shooting for. One was private sector job growth, and we've seen that, 72,000 since I've been in. Another one was personal income growth. Median income growth is up $2,000. So this is the individual that we've been focusing on. We want to have more jobs, so you got more job opportunities. And we want your personal income to go up, and that's up $2,000. So overall, what we've got is the 2 of the 5 measurables are in the economic field, and they're both going in the right direction.
Okay, so,
Hang on for a second, let me make sure everybody gets a chance.
all
We'll
right,
come back to you.
okay, I'll follow up on that.
All right.
Thanks.
Hi, Sarah Hollenbeck, 41 Action News. My question is, this budget also keeps in place those business income tax cuts that you have been in favor of, those cuts. But a lot of people out there, when we talk to citizens in Kansas City or across the state, they say these businesses need to pay their fair share. What's your reaction to that?
Well, what we're trying to do is create a pro-growth tax policy and get completely off income taxes altogether. And we're wanting to continue that movement to do that. When we first started down this path, we did a lot of analysis of it, and all the economic modeling said that if you want to create jobs, one of the best things you can do is take your tax off a small business. That is a big net job creator. We do a lot of incentives right now to big corporations to move to the state of Kansas. Every state does. So we give a lot of incentives to them to move into the state of Kansas that a lot of people would say, well, that's not really fair that you're giving that money to General Motors in Kansas City to do an expansion. Why does GM need that money? Well, because they create a lot of jobs. And we've been willing to do that as a state, as most states have. What we're now doing is taking the next step, saying, well, we also want the growth of small business, because small business is where 70% of Kansans work for themselves and 10 or fewer employees. So we want to see that group really grow, and frankly, they create a lot more jobs than GM does. And I love GM. They're great. I drive their product. They create jobs in my state. But the big one we want to see grow is small business, because that's the one that creates the next Cerner Corporation out of Kansas City. That was a small business at one point in time. Garmin, that was a small business that creates the next one. And you need hundreds and thousands of those started to get 1 or 2 of those really big ones to grow up. So we want to see that policy continue to grow. We've had a big growth in the number of small business filings in the state of Kansas. We've had people moving into the state of Kansas off the small business exemption, creating jobs, and that's why we've invested in that tax policy, and the early data on it looks very encouraging.
I know you guys have questions. Hold on, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask a question.
My name is Gus Falk. I'm from the Foreign Press in Washington. I have a question.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Kansas is in Washington also seen as a sort of a testing ground for fiscally conservative policy. Did you feel in the last few months that it was not only a budget at stake, but also a certain philosophy?
Well, there have been a lot of eyes watching Kansas of what we are doing here, moving off of an income tax on a consumption-based tax system, managed care and Medicaid, what we've done in our CAPER system and a transition from a defined benefit more to a defined contribution type of system. These are kind of the big sort of policy moves that a lot of the private sector has done years ago in some of these areas. If you're looking at healthcare, if you're looking at pension system, private sector went this way 30 years ago. And much of government now is starting to look at how do you migrate into those types of systems, because they work, You also try to hold your costs down. Anytime we can hold our costs down, we can pass that on back to our taxpayers in the state of Kansas and lower taxes. So I think a lot of people are watching that, and particularly when you got the left in America that's going so hard left than now, where they want much more redistribution of wealth and want many more laws and a lot more control in the system. So then you get that dynamic of juxtapositioning these two, and you get a lot of people watching to see how these work or don't work. You get a lot of people wanting this to fail in the state of Kansas. So they put a highlight on it and not give us the time to succeed, when these are well-tested systems. But a lot of times it's difficult to get them implemented in the time frames and the length of time that you need to be able to do it in a public sector setting.
How sustainable is this plan, and if for only two factors of you have the potential of a school finance ruling coming down in the next few months, and also it seems like we're in a cycle where every time we have a new consensus revenue estimate, it's created a budget shortfall that you have to fill either through allotments or budget cuts. So given those two factors, what's the sustainability here? What's the guarantee that we aren't going to find ourselves in a similar situation next year?
I don't know that I can't project what it'll be into this next year. If the national economy starts picking up, that'll have a nice positive impact. If sales start picking up nationally, we like the gas prices being low, but actually for us on severance tax that hurts. So I don't know. You can't, Jonathan. Two factors that have been somewhat taken off to the side, so we don't have as much of a wild card on the pension system, which we've dealt with, and the Medicaid system, which we've got in both of those in a more sustainable position. The wild card there being K-12 funding, even though we've continued to put large increases in K-12 funding in the state of Kansas. I think it was a really positive move that the legislature went to block granting on K-12 this year, because you had that formula that last year was supposed to grow 130 million and it ended up getting up to 240 million.
There's now a legal challenge to the block grant law, as I'm sure you know.
But you look at that, when you budgeted 130 million increase, and then it grows to a 240 million increase, and that was the K-12 allotment back to 177 million increase. That one really adds to the questionable on your expenditure side of the equation.
We have time for just a couple of more questions. So Andy,
I do have one. So as the revenue picture improves and money starts coming in, what will your priorities be in terms of, further buying down income tax or maybe putting some money into the state hospital system?
Well, there's a ratchet built into this tax proposal that once you get over 102.5% revenue of the preceding year, that money goes back into income tax reductions.
Is that automatic?
So that's set in the statute. So it's 102.5%, and then it goes back. The idea there is to say, okay, you can have some growth of government, but otherwise you really should give this back to the taxpayer.
So then the growth of government that you're allowing for, where does that money go? The 2.5% before we start ratcheting down?
Well, almost all of it goes into K-12, Medicaid, CAPERS. Those have been the big three. The other areas of government we've generally held. I know public safety this last time, Andy, public safety increased 14 to 15, 6.2 million in that budget year, and there'll be a slight increase in it the next time around as well. So I think there'll probably be some focus in on public safety. We've got, I want to get more highway patrolmen out on the road. Law enforcement across the country has been really challenged, I think, and they're having trouble hiring in a lot of places. So I think that's an area we need to look at. And then our prison system is always one, I think, too, that we've got to make sure it's handling right. The state hospitals, I think we really need to help out as much as we can. I've been on all of them and all the places, and we're trying to get more integrated models taking place within our state hospital and the totality of state government. And we've got groups meeting and working now how we can get these models better integrated, because generally by the time you get somebody in the state hospital system, they've been met and addressed and worked with often through K-12, law enforcement, public assistance system. You've seen them a couple of times along the way. And what I want to do is back us up and try to get these systems more integrated, so that once we start making contact with an individual because of particular needs, and a lot of times mental health, substance abuse issues, let's start working with them much earlier. So I hope we can cut our cost down once you get to this system where you're doing an inpatient long-term. That's a very expensive system, and we haven't had those well integrated previously. That's a problem across the country, but I think it's one we got to start on. We need to work more with.
Okay, Peter?
Governor, you keep mentioning the big increases for K-12, and yet there were several districts in Kansas this year that had to close early because they couldn't afford to finish out the full 180-day schedule. There was one district where the superintendent resigned because the district couldn't afford to pay the salary anymore. Where's the money going? Why is it that despite these increases you talked about, districts are making draconian cuts?
Yeah, Peter, we can look at those specific ones and we can show you the amount they got increase. But I think a good one to refer to is Garden City. Just as an example, they came in front of the Extraordinary Needs Group. Remember the pool of funds, I think it was $12 million that was created to help schools that have a major change.
It's now gone. That's whatever we're going to do. Got swept.
Let me finish the thought on it if you don't mind. But they had an ethanol plant, they got property tax devaluation, but their budget went up 9% over the prior year. And they had very little ending balances because they doubled their normal increase in salary increases that they were giving to people in the system. Now that was a choice they made, and that's fine. But then they come and asking for money at the end of the year when they spin it down because they had a big increase that came in, then you had an extraordinary event. I hope you look in depth at some of those situations in those school districts, because the total amount of money has gone up substantially. From 14 to 15, $195.5 million increase to K-12.
And Peter, if you come see us, we can give you the specifics on any district that you ask. And so last question, Brian.
Senator Jeff Longbein, who is a member of your party, delivered a speech during the final tax debate where he accused and he voted for the bill. He accused your administration of perpetrating political blackmail, specifically referring to that there was this veto threat out there that you wouldn't sign a bill that had the business income tax in there. At the same time, these budget cuts, there was a ticking clock for that. So can you respond to that claim that you were basically blackmailing the legislature into getting what you wanted?
Jeff, Senator Longbein has his opinion. I respect Jeff's a good legislator. What we put forward was a tax proposal. I said there was two types of tax proposals, two specific ones that I wouldn't sign. I negotiated on 150 different types of tax bills. Constant, just different types of ideas coming forward. All the time. It was more than 150, and you had a multiple set of moving parts. At the end of the day, what happened, and I think you were there at that joint caucus we had, just said, guys, we're out of time. And now you're basically down to one of two options because we just don't have time to run back through the system with everything. You're either going to have to do what the Senate passed, or something close to what I proposed. You ran out of time there.
You did give a hard line, and I was there when the Secretary of Revenue told the Senate that you would veto a bill that had the business income tax piece in it. So I mean, you did give the legislature a hard line that you would veto that if it came across your desk.
I did say that.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming today. We need to get the governor out for another appointment.